CR101radio.com, podcasts, and more.
30. God's tax. The tithe is God's tax. It is required of men by God as their landlord because, as the Bible repeatedly declares, the earth is the Lord's, Exodus 9:29, Psalm 24:1, etc. God requires the tithe as his tax, but not, as Jesus Christ declared, at the expense of, quote, the weightier matters of the law, judgment, justice, mercy, and faith. These ought ye to have done, and not to leave the other undone. Matthew 23:23. That is, tithing must go hand in hand with godly morality. The basic premise of the tithe is thus that, quote, the earth is the Lord's, and he bestows it upon men in return for the tithe and the obedience of faith. Where men and nations neglect their duty to God, the result is judgment. Because, quote, the earth is the Lord's, end quote, it cannot be claimed by the state, taxed by the state, or seized by the state. Such actions are the marks of a tyrant. 1 Samuel 8:11-18. The story of Naboth and his vineyard is a classic case of the tyranny of an expropriating state and ruler. The tithe belongs to God, not to the church. Quote, and all the tithe of the land is the Lord's. It is holy unto the Lord. Leviticus 27:30. The church has no right to equate itself with God. When the church is faithful to its Lord, then and only then is it entitled to receive the tithe. If men give to a church that denies Jesus Christ, which preaches an anti-Christian social gospel, and which proclaims another plan of salvation, to give to that church is not to give a tithe to God, but against him. It means participating in an anti-Christian enterprise. Malachi declared that denying God his due was robbing him, and it results in a curse, whereas yielding God his due results in so great, quote, a blessing that there shall not be room enough to receive it. Malachi 3:8-10. What belongs to God must be rendered to God, to truly godly religious causes, even as that which belongs to Caesar, to the state, must be rendered to Caesar. Mark 12:17. In the Old Testament, the tithe went to the support of the priests and Levites. The function of these men was more than what we today call religious. It included education and many other social functions, all from a strictly religious perspective. The tithe thus provided for, among other things, both religious nurture and worship, and for schools. The teaching function of priests and Levites is often cited in Scripture. The purpose of the tithe was to render unto God his due, but it also served to protect property. The tithe was a manifest witness that God is the Lord over property and not the state, and property is subject to the laws of God, not the laws of the state. Biblical law strictly protects property rights. As H.B. Rand noted in the Digest of the Divine Law, quote, nowhere in the Bible is there any indication that property rights are to ever be abolished. On the contrary, such rights are emphasized and safeguards are placed around that property to protect the man in his possessions.